Welcome to Sound and Vision, conversations with contemporary artists and musicians about the creative process. Here's the host of Sound and Vision, Brian Alfred.
Sound and Vision is supported by the New York Studio School. The school welcomes artists from around the world to join the 5-day virtual intercession drawing marathon entitled Drawing on Your Past, The Mind's Eye with Graham Nixon and guests. It's held from Thursday, March 23rd to Monday, March 27th. It's rigorous and immersive. The Studio School's legendary marathons present an extensive range of art-making strategies, comprehensive critiques, and inspirational discussions. Expansive first-hand discoveries in marathons propel artists to relate to drawing, painting, and sculpture as direct methodologies for understanding their experience in the world, the profound impact of which continues far beyond each marathon's conclusion. Visit nyss.org to apply today. Sound and Vision is sponsored by Golden Artist Colors. Golden Artist Colors makes the best acrylics, Williamsburg oils, and core watercolors, and you can find them in your local art store or online at goldenpaints.com. Sound and Vision is also sponsored by Fulcrum Coffee Roasters. Fulcrum makes amazing coffee, and you can head over to their website at fulcrumcoffee.com and check out their subscriptions. They have an amazing variety that you could choose from and have coffee delivered to your house every month. Everything from light roast subscription to espresso to all brands, single origin. They even have a sunset subscription, a jazz alley night subscription. It's a really cool curated coffee experience that can be delivered to your door. And you can get a discount by adding the code ALFREDSTUDIO whenever you check out from the website. Fulcrum Coffee Roasters from Seattle, check them out. Anna Ortiz is a Mexican-American painter living in Brooklyn, New York. She received her BA and BFA from Tufts University and the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. She earned an MFA in painting from the Tyler School of Art. She recently concluded her solo exhibition, Hacia Aztlán, at Dinner Gallery in Chelsea. She has also had solo shows at Proto Gomez and at Delphi University. Her work has been included in group shows at Selenas Mountain, My Pet Ram Front Room Gallery, as well as a recent show at Risdy's Painting Gallery curated by Angela Dufresne. She's been an artist in residence at AIR Birdcliff, Obris Residency in Portugal and the Netherlands, as well as the Vermont Studio Center. While at Tyler School of Art, she was awarded the Future Faculty Fellowship. Her work has been featured in I Like Your Work, Make Magazine, El Diario, and Art Forum. She will also be included in the forthcoming Art Maze Double Edition. I spoke with Anna about family and identity, a history of artists, painting from within, and much more. Here's our conversation. Yeah, no accent?
Not that I know of. My parents are not from Boston originally, so I think I linked up with how they spoke.
Right.
But my dad has a really heavy accent. He's Mexican, so he has a pretty wild accent, but no Boston accent.
Wild?
Thank God.
Like Mexican wild or just wild in general?
Well, just wild because it's confusing. He's actually Belgian Mexican.
What?
So he was born in Belgium. Yeah. And he grew up speaking Flemish and French, and then learned Spanish when he was, I guess, like little though, like 3. So he was a linguist. So he actually met somebody who was kind of trained in pinpointing people's accents, and the guy could not figure out where my dad was from.
It's that French-Mexican curveball.
It's a really weird one.
Yeah.
With a little Flemish on top.
Wait, is Flemish like the Dutch influence?
Yeah, it's the Germanic language, and actually Belgium is like one of the smallest countries, and like half of the parliament like didn't speak to the other half for a certain time because one side was Flemish and the other side was French, and they could not, bridge the divide.
Yeah.
That was like pretty recent too. That's like in the last 15, 20 years.
Well, I don't know if you like talking about this stuff, but I love languages. Not that I'm a polyglot, but I love languages in general. And I am part Belgian, so there's that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I'm white, so I got it.
It doesn't make it inevitable.
I mean, there's some European stuff, like you find out about stuff. The two biggest ones were, because the whole, advent of 23andMe or whatever, it was my father saying, listen, don't tell anyone this, but there's a little bit of Irish.
I'm from Boston. I welcome you.
The sheer embarrassment was endearing of listen, we won't talk about this. And then the Native American quotient that a lot of white people have, you know what I mean? Americans was like something that we didn't know about. So, it's interesting when you find out that stuff. But yeah, just a garden variety of like whiteness of, Western European stuff. But Belgian was one of those. And it was like...
Yeah, no, it's rare.
Yeah, but the whole French versus, the French side versus the German side. But so the German influence on that French mixed with the Mexican made him a covert accent operator.
Yeah, really hard to pin down. Really, really unique.
Well, what about mom? What was her?
Oh, she is a white woman from San Francisco. And she, I think she just has like a very Californian or whatever, the newscaster way of speaking. But she is very fluent in Spanish. She and my dad lived in Mexico for the early part of their marriage, and she's totally obsessed with Mexico, as am I. And her Spanish is like native. It's really amazing.
That's cool. So, but when did she first start traveling to Mexico? Like, when did she pick up the language?
Well, I mean, I don't know if she studied in college, because she was an undergrad and my dad was a grad student. And I don't actually know for a fact when she started learning it, but she may have just picked it up living there. And then she taught at the University of Guadalajara, so she had to learn.
Yeah. It'd be funny if she learned on Haight and Ashbury at like City Lights or something. The little like learn Spanish book. It's that Bay Area accent.
Right.
So that's cool. So, growing up, you had, I guess that cultural aspect of, growing up multicultural and language going on. So, and apparently art in the family, right? Wasn't your grandfather a painter?
Yeah, my grandfather made a living as a portrait painter in Guadalajara, and I don't want to say like he was famous by any stretch of the imagination, but I think Guadalajara was like a small enough city as far as portraits would go that he was kind of like one of the go-to guys.
Yeah.
So he made a living making portraits for wealthy families.
That's cool. And may I ask what the look, if you, can you describe these portraits? I mean, they could be anything from like Manet to Picasso to Frankenthaler. Kidding.
Yeah. Yeah, they're Frankenthaler-esque portraits.
I want to see that, don't you?
Yeah,
they're fluid.
I do. I'll tell you who doesn't want to see that is the bourgeoisie of Guadalajara.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yeah, I think they have like a kind of academic quality to them, like maybe a little bit of Manet in there, where they have kind of like an outline-y quality as well. But the family portraits that were in pastel have this like beautiful softness to them. He did the whole family, all of us really. And then he also did all of the governors of Guadalajara. So actually, if you visit, you can go see like a ton of his paintings at the governor's palace. They're like all on display, and they're formal. But yeah, they definitely have like a very tender likeness. Like they're accurate, but they're also very sweet. Yeah, and then he also did like hunting scenes. He was a duck hunter, so he would do that kind of thing. And then kind of like after Chardin or somebody, he would do like a hung rabbit in the studio.
Right.
Yeah.
That's cool. So you had the roadmap, as we say. Not everyone gets that, you know?
No, and in addition to my grandfather, I have two aunts, and one is a sculptor, and she really like just ushered me in. She just took me super seriously at a young age, and yeah, she just was like, this kid's gonna be an artist. This is her deal. So I feel like so lucky that they fostered all of that stuff for me.
That's nice. I was going to say, well, you're screwed. You got to be an artist for the rest.
Totally. I think there was like a moment when I was like 18, I was like, does anyone think this is like a good idea? Like, has anyone thought this through actually?
That just goes to show you the grass is always greener, because everyone who's an artist whose parents are like, well, why can't you get a real job? Or why can't you go into law or business? You know what I mean? And you'd be like, damn, why can't you just support me? And then if you get the parents who are like, you're going to be an artist, you're like, wait, are you sure about that?
Yeah, like, have you guys thought about how I'm going to pay rent at all?
Yeah, like veterinarian. Doesn't that seem more prudent?
Yeah.
So, well, that's good. You had the green light. I mean, were you always drawing and stuff as a kid? Were you
Yeah, always.
housed
always.
in creativity? Did you move around a lot?
No, we stayed in Worcester until I went to college, and I went to Tufts to be kind of close to home, and then I transferred into the museum school. But yeah, I was in Worcester my whole childhood, and yeah, they were really good. They dedicated like a landing outside of my bedroom to be my studio, and like I took tons of art classes, and it was just always part of the deal. It's always who I was.
That's so nice. Well, I'm glad that you're doing well. It would have been rough if you were... You know what I mean? They're like, my kid's going to be an artist. It's written in stone in the family lore, and then you like can't paint anything. You're just like, I can't.
Nobody looks at anything you make. I mean, I guess that's also part of the trajectory or whatever you want to say. It's like, I always knew this was the deal. I just had to kind of figure out all of the other pieces to make it work. And like, whether or not that happened to me when I was 25, 40, or 80, that was the TBD part,
Right.
But
well, let's be honest, there's the art side of things, like making the stuff, and then there's the other side of it, which some people aren't equipped. I mean, it's its own sort of thing, the song and dance of getting it out there,
Exactly. Yeah, and that it be ready to be out there as well.
Right. Yeah, that's a whole process. But so when you were growing up, well, here's the flip side of the coin is what's the music situation like?
There was, my mother swears, she everything I do is golden. So she swears that I was like the best flute player ever, but I literally played flute for 1 year in fourth grade. So, that remains to be seen. My sister played the cello, which is really like a punishment for a child to like heft a cello back and forth to school. And we both kind of grew out of playing music pretty early on. And I quit everything. Like I quit Girl Scouts, I quit creative movement, I quit theater. I was just like, let me be in the studio. Let me just draw.
Wow,
let me just make stuff.
Pointed early.
Ruthless. Yeah, I had no other interest. I did play sports actually, but that's only because of the high school that I went to.
It was very sporty.
Yeah, it was also just really small, so they just needed bodies like on the field. Like I probably wasn't very good at all, but
did you play soccer?
I played soccer and lacrosse.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes you just need stick someone on left defense just to block people. Just go out there and get in the way.
Yeah, exactly. Like they needed a sub, so I was there.
Well, that's good. And it was are we talking like small with a because isn't like Worcester kind of like a big town? Oh, yeah, maybe so you went to a small school then within it.
Yeah, Worcester was like when I went to school there. It was the second largest city in all of New England.
Okay.
And
I thought so.
the public schools, yeah, it was big. I mean, it still is really big, but the public schools were like all of the things of like metal detectors and 1,000-kid classrooms or whatever classes. And my mom taught Spanish at a fancy small private school. So my sister and I went for like next to nothing, which is basically what they could afford. So I was, very lucky to go to a very small private school all the way from like fourth grade up into senior year, which is the same school the whole time. And my mother was my Spanish teacher, and we commuted together, and yeah, so I knew those 50 kids for the entire, from
you were
fourth
tight.
grade through puberty. Like I knew everything about those kids.
Oh my gosh. No, it seems like you have a good relationship with the family, because that sounds like it could be a potential hazardous situation.
My mom and I are close, but no, the rest of my family actually, like, we don't really talk. We have it was a pretty rough upbringing, okay. But my mom and I have always been pretty tight.
Well, I mean, considering you were going to school with her, that might have been the most important dynamic.
Yeah.
If that one was
sour,
that would have made school tough.
Honest.
No, I can imagine, like, I mean, if my parents taught in my school, I think, when you're a kid, everything I do is embarrassing to my kid,
Yeah.
Let alone being around all day.
Yeah, and taking instruction from them. That's a lot to ask.
In the mother tongue, literally.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I also didn't take Spanish seriously because I was like, whatever, I'm already fluent. Like, right. I don't need to study this. And then she, like, failed me on my first quiz. I was like, oh, yeah.
She had to lay down the gauntlet.
Study.
You're not getting a free pass here, kid. It's right. Funny because sometimes I, being in the city and I, run the soccer club, and a lot of the Latino kids in the club take Spanish as a foreign language. I'm like, come on, guys.
Good for them.
And it's always like, well, we're just getting a little better at it. I was like, well, Mandarin, if you get the Mandarin, Spanish, English triumvirate, I mean, that's a powerful linguistic, triad. I guess maybe it's just a lot to handle.
Yeah, that is like a shield.
Wouldn't it? I mean, jeez, that's like, 80% of the globe probably.
Yeah, that's true.
Someone's speaking one of those
20 years.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Totally.
So, so you took Spanish. What was your art class like there?
It was pretty amazing. I look back and I'm just like, how did that happen? There was a separate art building, and there was even like a wood shop. So like in high school, there was, I had one teacher, Bob Deck, who was great, and then Winslow Myers was my AP art teacher. And it was pretty free form. I feel like we would have some kind of info session on an artist that he would present, and then some kind of vague topic. We would just make some work. And it was across the board. I feel like I didn't use oil paints until I got to Tufts, but it was just like a giant studio building to like mess around.
That's rare for high school, I think. Safe to say.
I know. Yeah. No, really, it's an amazing school, actually.
Well, good thing you moved to New York, to Brooklyn, to have a studio space, because actually, I shouldn't presume that your studio space isn't ginormous. Well,
I have a studio in Greenpoint, but I'm actually speaking to you from upstate, which is like my teensy tiny half-day studio. Over the pandemic, we got a house upstate.
Nice.
So I have a little space here, but I have a decent sized space in Greenpoint. It's space is hard to come by, but I finally figured out a good spot.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, that was a pro move to get a space in nature during COVID.
It was, I feel like it looked panicky at the time.
Right.
It was like a real doomsday kind of attitude.
It was panicky, yeah, like for good reason,
Yeah. A lot of people I know who are older and wiser than me bought places upstate after 9/11, and it makes complete sense to me that was like the decision. You gotta have somewhere safe to get out of New York, and with rent, it's like you never really feel completely secure in New York if you're just renting. So
Yeah.
yeah, so we bought this house and it was like in total shambles, and we spent most of the pandemic renovating it, and it's come a long way.
That's nice, though. I mean, that's a good project for the time,
Yeah.
Although I don't know how you got materials. Was it tough logistically?
It was pretty fine for the most part. I mean, we're not that far from Home Depot, and up here everything is just more convenient. Everything's easier to access. So
Yeah.
also nobody was really buying the whole COVID thing.
Right.
But everything was open.
Yeah, they're like,
Nobody
it's fine up here. Not like you city folk.
We don't have it here.
Right.
Yeah,
Too much
exactly.
air.
Yeah, yeah. Just go outside. You're fine. So that wasn't so much of a problem, but it was like a really great project just to, rip out some walls and process like what was happening politically. It was such a nightmare. It was like really great to, do something cathartic and also to make this house better. Felt really good.
Yeah, it's nice to have. Yeah, I can imagine. I was stuck in the city, so I didn't have the
whole time
escape hatch. Real quick, to loop back to that earlier question. So you were a 1-year phenomenon on the flute, but what was the music situation like in the house? Like, did you was there music in the house all the time? Like, I'm imagining my stereotypical, based on the family, I could imagine, some Grateful Dead, some mariachi, like a good combination of Bay Area and Mexican music. But I'm sure it was probably like, Billy Joel, or maybe like, 50 Cent.
That like all of those descriptions sound so bad. Like I'm happy to report it was a different kind of bad. My dad always listened to lots of jazz, which
Nice.
I find so like frenetic and crazy making. And my mom would, it's really an acquired taste. My mom would always listen to like Carole King, when she was like vacuuming. That was like her go-to music. And at some point I found their record collection and I realized that they had been total hippies. Like they never, quote, smoked grass. And like didn't party hard, but they were definitely like bohemians. So they had all of the great records, like the White Album and Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin. They didn't go for the Doors. That was like too, I don't know. It probably was like too sexy. Like I don't know what the adjective is, but it was something too much.
A little too much musk. A little Jim
Morrison
machismo. It's aggressive.
Yeah, it was too tempting. Too much masculinity probably. But that I uncovered that trove and was like, I dropped it. And I was sort of shocked and impressed at their stash.
Well, those were the times, That's the go-to. I mean, the White Album doesn't get any better, really.
Yeah, I mean, I was like, oh shit, this is unbelievable. But yeah, then it sort of set me off on my like path to be like a brooding 90s alternative rocker, and that was my place in society, and that worked pretty well.
Yeah, like Nirvana seems like a good alternative to Carole King.
Totally. Yeah. I saw Nirvana in concert. I was obsessed with the Breeders.
Oh man, good
yeah.
stuff. The Pixies?
Really? Oh, I got to the Pixies later in life. I had to go to art school to get to the Pixies.
Oh, right. Yeah. The art school pass. Got it.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, but that's good stuff, that 90s music, Yeah. And, well, so, when you got out, was it a foregone conclusion that you were just going to go to art school?
No, like I said, I had this like moment of like, I need to have like actual life skills or like an education that will produce some kind of income.
Oh, you were serious about that? That wasn't just like a back of the mind thing. It was kind of like, no, I really have to.
Yeah, and like I came from like a private school, so it was all about preparation for college, and I just followed suit. So, I went to Tufts. I started out at Tufts, and I took art classes right away, freshman year, but part of me was like should I be in international relations? Like, I thought that would be a road for me.
Yeah.
Mostly because I'm really argumentative. So I thought that would be like a great way to, use my skills.
Debate team style,
And
right?
yeah, yeah. And like,
Politics, global issues. Yeah. That seems good.
and language too. I was
Yeah, yeah.
into, okay, I could do this. And then I just took painting classes like, oh no, obviously this is what I'm going to do.
Oh, you caught the bug in class? Oh, or it
Like
reified
immediately.
it? Yeah, it was just like, oh, this is where I want to be.
Yeah, it was just like this is like a no-brainer. Like this is obviously like my brain is just like firing off in ways that like it's not in any other context. Like this is where I need to be.
Yeah, you get that charge. Yeah, it's funny because
Yeah.
sometimes you can know that stuff before you actually know that that's. It's hard to explain it, but like when you get into a studio class and like an intro to painting or something or sculpting, and you're like that charge, that energy you get where you want to keep being there, and it's such like a foreign idea in like school to like want to be somewhere after the bell rings.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's kind of like the big green light, but that's confusing usually because you're like, wait, this isn't what school's supposed to, I'm not used to this feeling of wanting to stay late or like, be here. And then you figure out there's people who actually have studio spaces, and then it's all over.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember I had a really great freshman year painting professor. Now I'm forgetting his last name, but he was a South African painter. His name was Paul. And I remember at one point he was trying to get one of the students who was not, this was like a elective for them. And he was like, you need to focus more on what you're doing. Look at Anna. She hasn't spoken in hours. So I was like, oh, I'm just like a freak over here, like obsessed with this thing in front of my face.
Yeah, you were in the flow state early. That's a good sign.
Yeah.
And teachers can
Yeah.
see that, Like when I have students who come a little early and they don't really talk much and they're just working the whole time, they're in it, That's like the real stuff,
Yeah, that's where they belong. That's it.
So did you feel like it was the right place for you? Like you felt good in that school considering,
Oh, Tufts?
Yeah.
No, I didn't like Tufts at all. No, it was like
That was my
so
subtle way
many-
of asking. Did you hate it there?
I didn't hate it per se, but I think so. Tufts and the museum school, it used to be a little bit different. Now they've like completely, assimilated.
Yeah.
But it used to be separate, and I transferred into the museum school program. So at first, I was only at Tufts, and then eventually I was like half-time museum school and then fully at the museum school. And just like everything about the museum school made no sense on paper and completely suited everything that I wanted from an art school. Like it was totally free form when I went there. I don't know if it's changed, but there was no attendance. There was no grades. You just showed up at the end of the semester with your portfolio to 2 students and 2 teachers, and you presented it, and they passed or failed you. That was it.
That
And
makes
it was
it easy.
very, I mean, for some people, I can't imagine being 18 and just showing up and having that kind of trust.
Right.
Because I probably wouldn't have worked it out. Like I probably also would have done what everybody did, which was like drugs on the Fenway. But because I had the structure of Tufts and I was so excited to be at art school now, I really learned a lot. I mean, the teachers were super accessible. They were very rigorous. They took everything like very seriously. It was like just an amazing conversation, and it was amazing. And then it made Tufts look really like conservative and kind of outdated, like just this like staid academia,
Yeah.
So in retrospect, I was like ready to say goodbye to Tufts and just be full time at the museum school. But I went to Paris my junior year, and that was kind of like a interruption in the whole thing. And by the time I got back, I was like, I'm ready to just make work.
Well, you really glazed over Paris there. I'm sure that was like
Yeah.
eye-opening. I mean, Louvre,
Yeah.
Musée d'Orsay,
Yeah.
probably, and all that stuff, right?
Paris was amazing. I was one of the few Americans who had this like special kind of relationship with the Louvre, the Ecole du Louvre. So I took classes at the Louvre, which most French people would be like, that's not real. That's no non-French people are allowed to take classes there. But Tufts had this program, and
You snuck in.
I snuck in,
That's amazing.
and with that, I was granted this unbelievable free museum pass to any museum in all of France. So it didn't matter where I was. I could just go into a museum.
You were able to skip the line? That's got to be.
I feel like maybe, I don't remember that part, but I know at the Louvre for sure.
Yeah.
And then like Paris just had so many like little tiny museums, you know, like Delacroix's house is there. You could just like on your lunch break go to all these little unknown spots. And that was just amazing.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, that early, and it took me so long to travel to Europe, you know, out of college and stuff. So that must have been really exciting.
Yeah, it was also a great city to like be on my own because you can just really walk the whole city. You know, you can just, it's so dense. You can just, it's like a maze. You just make it your own.
Yeah. Little stroll down the Champs-Élysées.
Yeah.
C'est magnifique.
C'est incroyable.
So, and that wasn't your last school trip, right? Because you went to Temple for grad school, I think. Is that right?
Yes.
So
Yeah,
what
I
made
went
you
to
go to
Tyler.
Temple? Or Tyler?
Well,
sorry.
it's funny. I was like a lost soul after undergrad. I was like so confused about what to do and how to be an artist. And the thing about the museum school is it's really wonderful and this like kind of free form thing, but it's not great at pointing you in, or it wasn't great for me and like pointing me in the right direction on what to do next. Or I also wasn't that good at figuring out how to ask for that kind of assistance. So who knows? But I found myself kind of without a community after I graduated and looking to other people like, how do you be an artist? Like, what is this thing now?
Yeah. What do I do?
Yeah. And I just applied to a bunch of schools, and Tyler gave me this like amazing package. They gave me a really great fellowship. I was a future faculty fellowship, and you know, it was pretty close to Boston. So but also I needed to leave Boston. Like I was ready. Boston is just like a big town full of sports fans. So I was really ready to leave.
I was going to ask how you feel about Boston because, you know, I haven't spent that much time in Boston, but it does feel very Boston-y.
It's just like so towny. And I'm from Worcester, which is even more towny. So I know what I'm talking about here.
Yeah, you were in the deep end of the Boston pool.
Yeah. It's very charming. And, you know, culturally, there's a lot of interesting stuff. The museums are amazing. Being across from the Gardner and the Museum of Fine Arts was fantastic. I mean,
ICA, right?
like amazing resources.
Yeah, and
yeah,
I love that podcast on the Gardner, on the heist.
Oh yeah, it's so cool. The documentary is really great too. Yeah, fascinating. And then, you know, Harvard, like the Fog is gorgeous museum. It's such like a little gem. Like not everybody gets there. If you're there long enough, you will. So there's a lot of, there's like a lot of culture there. But after a while, it's just this, I mean, so many people said to me, what do you think, you're going to be an artist? Like that was just like what everyone would say. Like what do you think's going to happen? You're just going to be an artist? I was like, no, I already am an artist. Like, but that's not the problem. Like, it's the other parts. But the art scene there is just different, and I never figured it out. So right. I would be interested to hear what people who are there, like making it work, have to say. But I really didn't see a place for me there.
So you cashed in your chips on one provincial town, and you went to another.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I love sports. Just kidding, I don't.
I love a rabid.
Yeah,
it's
so
not just sports. It's like a rabid fan base. You know what I
It's
mean?
so angry. It's so aggressively sports focused. Like either way, whoever wins or loses, there's going to be a fight in
Yeah, it's
Boston.
just
That's
so like piss and vinegar. I remember one
yes.
time visiting Boston with my extended family, and I forget what the parameters were, but we were walking back to our hotel when like Fenway let out.
Oh God, poor you.
And it was like crossing a street. It was, it was just insane.
Yeah.
Like it
Yeah.
was that feeling of like mob mentality of wanting to just avoid humans at all costs was not comfortable.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it's like Red Rover or something. Or like, get me out of here.
Yeah.
It's dangerous.
Yeah, I guess when you're from the place, it's a little less intimidating. Because I grew up in Pittsburgh, and there's a sports fan base there, but it just didn't feel as quite as toxic as Boston felt like. Like maybe a fight or two, but not like, more fights than not.
Yeah. Yeah. It is what it is.
Oh,
It's
wait.
just
I did you hear that? That's the sound of like emails coming in about Boston's awesome. What are you talking about? I know it's great, and that's one night of a walk or what. I love Boston. It was great.
I'm from there. I can say it.
I mean,
yeah.
Pittsburgh's just as provincial and bonkers, but we
Right.
got the Warhol, so
Right.
There's
Yeah.
always the
There's
perks
good stuff.
of the provincial towns and the good food and knowing the ins and outs of it. But so, did you like
Yeah.
grad school? Was it good?
No, I hated grad school.
Oh,
It was
nice.
awful. No, I had a really hard time. It was a bad time for me, like personally. I was just dealing with so much like family fallout stuff, and I didn't know like a lot of what was going on in my like personal life, and in retrospect, I really needed help, but I went to Tyler, which was this like at the time, and again, I think it's changed. I think it's softened a lot, but at the time it was like this really rigorous kind of like, we're going to shred you and then you're going to build yourself up from the pile of ashes. And it did not work on me. Like it didn't fly.
What years were you there?
I was there 2003 to 5.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So I fled. I was like, I gotta get out of here. I'm gonna like I feel like my true Bostonian came out, and I was like, all right, if you guys want to fight, I'm ready to fight. But that wasn't actually what I needed or what I wanted. And if it were now, I think a teacher may have like actually just been like, hey, do you need a hand, or like, do you need some help? And I would have said, yes, I really do.
Yeah.
But it was a different time, and the idea behind what you were supposed to get from that experience, it didn't work with me at all.
No, I don't think it worked for a lot. Isn't it funny though how the pendulum has really swung? I feel like you might have been right at the end of that wave of like the Marines style education system of where you just get flamed. And then you have to you basically, it's like hazing where you just get, I mean, it's not that bad,
Totally.
but you get run through the ringer, and you got to like toughen up. The attitude of like, well, you got to toughen up or you're not going to make it out there, which there is a little bit of validity to that, but I don't think it's the most encouraging and healthy environment for, mental health and stuff. And like no one talked about that stuff back then. It was just like, I'm not going to, you're just not tough enough. You know what I mean? Like you got to toughen up. You got to work harder, be stronger, deal with it, and that's, I mean, thankfully, although one wonders when you do come through a system like that, does it go too far the other direction?
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad to hear that I was at the end of it. I have always been so confused and jealous of the people who leave their grad schools and are like, I have the best friends from that experience. I have such I love my grad school. Like, I'm always like, what? Where was I? But also, I just don't understand why they like invite you here and then like tell you all of your ideas are total garbage. Like, this makes no sense to me. Like, you're the one who let me in. So like, let's work with what I got. Like, it doesn't have to be like scorched earth. Like, we could at least like break down some of the misconceptions of which there are several, and like, but that was work I ended up having to do kind of on my own afterwards.
Yeah. Recovery.
And it, yeah,
like
yeah,
self-recovery. I think I have the answer to that, though. I think I know why it's like that. One is it's like half the Marine mentality of where you could take any average person, you put them through boot camp, and they're going to be stronger. They're going to be more prepared. It's kind of like, they're going to have gone through that trauma, basically, and it's like, picking a scout, like you're going to sort of heal and get stronger from it. I mean, I'm not saying this is right. I'm saying I think that's sort of the mentality. And the other side of it is that if you go to schools that were pretty, like art schools, you have a lot of strong personalities of professors who would sort of fight each other or have very strict ideologies of what is valid or what's not valid up until a certain point. Then I think at a certain point people are like, it's okay, we're all voices are accepted. We can, everyone's point is valid, let's just make it stronger. Back then it was kind of like, this isn't interesting. Like you would just hear that. My best friend whose studio was with me, this is a great story. Well, it's not great, but I was listening to the crit because it was a studio next to mine, and it was a professor who's a very well-known professor at the school, who's like he was Mr. Alpha, and he's like, he gets in the studio, and he's like, and you can't help but eavesdrop because there's no roof or whatever. And like there's silence for a while, and my friend was like, "Oh yeah, this is kind of what I'm working on, blah blah," and it's quiet, and he's like, just like that real awkward silence of like, I'm gonna try to think of something to say, and then he goes, the best line, he goes, "Well, it's not that it's not interesting; it's just not interesting."
Oh, oh,
brutal. But that kind of like, I feel like you probably wouldn't hear that in a crit these days. You know what I mean?
Really? Yeah.
I think it's probably a little softer than that.
Softer. Yeah, I do worry about the current upcoming generations, that they are so sensitive, and there has to be like a happy medium between like the ringer that we were put through and then this like really kid glove treatment, because I think you just have to be so critical to yourself all the time in the studio, and you have to learn. And like, that kind of like hazing or whatever you want to say in grad school is also antithetical to that as well. Like you can't see your work for what it is if you have all of these kinds of like defensive mechanisms like blocking you from like your actual what you actually are seeing.
Right.
But like you have to teach yourself in some way to see the work for what it needs to be, or like what moves you have to make next to make it. And I don't mean to say better, because I know it's like a kind of useless like term, but that's the truth. Like the work has to be growing and changing, and you have to always be interacting with it in a new way.
Yeah.
And if you can't command like new stuff, then you're just going to run out of energy. You're not going to have anything to put forward.
Yeah. It's funny. I mean, because I'm a teacher, I think about that sometimes. And I feel like, I went through a grad program that was pretty rigorous. There was some pretty harsh stuff. But I feel like I came out, and yeah, it took me a little bit to sort of for the dust to settle. But I came out making work, and I feel like it did kind of make me stronger. Because I had to, I had to answer to a lot of, tough questions that weren't always based in sort of like a supportive, well, let's make your work better. Like, well, maybe if you did this, it was more like, well, like, how am I supposed to get into this? Like, this doesn't speak to me. And sometimes that kind of critique can be good in a way, because it challenges, you to be able to answer for it. I think the people who can get through it, they come out stronger. But the bad part of it is there's probably a lot of potential great artists who just come out of it and they're like, well, I don't want to do this anymore. This just ruins it for them. Yeah. So I don't know what's better. And then now it probably swings in the other direction to where it's just like, there's like criticism, like there's no real harsh criticism. Like it's very rare these days. And if someone does write something, like if you know art critics and you've read anything in the past couple days, I won't mention names, but there's been an article out that people are flipping out about, and it's like ridiculous. It's just funny.
It is pretty funny. And also, what's the point of it all if it's all good? I mean, we can't constantly be patting each other on the back all the time.
Right.
There has to be a limit to how much good work there is, especially considering how many artists there are. We don't need that much art. Like, let's just minimize a little bit here. Like,
right.
It's okay.
Yeah.
We don't need all of this.
Weed out a little bit of the...
Yeah.
It's so funny, too, because it's like, it's so transparent because we feel like response to things these days is just that kind of like informative, not really super positive, just kind of like, oh, here's a show, blah, blah, blah. And then if there's always like the once in a blue moon negative thing that comes out, but it's like patently negative, like this is terrible, this is ruining art, instead of just like a good, valid critique of whether this is, like a nuanced thing.
Yeah, it was not nuanced. It was like, I think we're talking about the
Oh, yeah, we are. There's nothing going on in criticism. So.
Right. Yeah. But also, it was just like such shocking headlines.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like that was part of it. It was just like Jerry really wanted to make like a splash, and like he did, but also that work is just like, it really isn't that exciting or intriguing, and it's okay that that's not doing anything.
Wait, who's Jerry? I don't know what you're talking about. All right, so
I'm not even going to say his last name. He's like Trump. You don't even have to say his last name.
Oh boy. So in school, what was your work like in grad school? You hated it, but what were you making?
So I was like really reactive, and I made like the most uptight photorealist paintings.
Oh boy.
Like super tight miniature paintings of like still lives of like nail polish and kind of like all of my like personal affects, like just like really like super tiny, perfect, like you would think it was off the wall, just an actual replica. And then the second year when I went to Rome, I did soften in that I started making more figurative work, and it was like people in the streets of Rome, like basically looking at these ruins, experiencing the city. And then I did like my thesis show was like all these tiny miniatures on panel, and then like burlap glued to panel of like the Tuscan landscape. Mm-hmm. And I mostly have been doing landscape since then, but there was some still life in there as well.
Was the technical stuff at the beginning kind of a defense mechanism?
Totally.
I did.
Yeah,
that.
I mean, I
made defensive paintings.
Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And mine were abstract, so it was even harder to do that. You know what I mean? Because it wasn't based on proficiency; it was based on like work ethic.
Right.
Like you may hate this, but you can't say I'm lazy.
Right.
That's like the total blue collar
really
thing.
Good tactic.
Yeah, it was blue collar. It's like, look, you might hate what I'm doing, and a lot of people did, but it's like you can't say that I'm not working hard. So
yeah, that's powerful.
Well, it didn't seem to work that well. People still hated my work. Not everyone.
You still learn a lot from when people hate your work, though.
Oh, definitely.
Like a really an awesome stance to come out of.
Yeah, I think if you're working hard, I try to tell my students, like, I made in undergrad, I made terrible work for a while. It's like you got to exercise the demons. You got to fail. You got to just try stuff, and doesn't work. Throw it against the wall, see what sticks, and then move on.
Yeah.
And like if you're trying to, polish everything out, it's just you're making work for other people basically. But that's the thing. Like it took me a while after school to get over that defense mechanism. Although fortunately I went to Skowhegan right after. And at Skowhegan, it was the total opposite of grad school. Everyone's like, yeah, man, we're all just here making work. Let's go hang out, So I was like, what the hell is going on here? This is like some sort of hippie colony where it's like the teachers weren't teachers. They were fellow art, or they were, I forget what they called them, but it wasn't teachers. It was like participants or something. It was like very democratic and super great and amazing teachers. So that was kind of a good yin to the yang,
Yeah, there was trust. People trusted that you were, committed to the work, and no one had to kind of tell you one way or the other how to get there. So you
Right.
could be free to make what you needed to make. That was
Definitely.
the museum school model. That was it. They just were like, you're here to make work, and if you're serious, you're gonna do it. And if not, they're kind of like, that's on you.
Right. Like, how are you gonna? There's other people out there working their butt off, like 150%. If
Yeah.
you're phoning it in, forget it. I mean, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah, exactly. Good luck to you.
Yeah. So how long did it take after, what was the plan when you got out of school? And B, how long did it take to sort of hit a groove?
Yeah, I took like a gap, like 6 months or something, to kind of figure out and collect my people and figure out how to land in New York. And then, I got to New York with a couple of friends, and we lived in Harlem at first, and that was, I think, in retrospect, kind of like a stalling period where it was like the job and the studio and like the all the stuff, figuring that part out was tricky. And then eventually, I think once I got to Brooklyn, a lot of it made more sense. Like everything kind of fell into place. Like the studio just brought so many more other artists, and suddenly like going to art shows made so much more sense. I wasn't like some interloper in someone else's world. No, this was like my world.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, just sort of bit by bit, you like build your community, and then now it's just everything I do.
Right. Yeah, it's funny too how, a neighborhood and an area can change things. Like when in the late 90s when I first moved to New York, it was Astoria, which I love Astoria, but, it wasn't really gangbusters as far as like fellow artists and studios. There was good coffee and stuff and good treats, but it wasn't until I moved to like South Williamsburg that I felt like, oh, okay, there's some people around. Like you feel the energy of it, even if you're not doing studio visits every day. You're just like, you see people. It feels like, oh, okay, I'm in the right spot.
Yeah. You just eventually kind of work your way into it, and then everything makes more sense once you see just like how much of the hive is all operating at the same capacity. And I never really had a hard time work ethic wise. Like I'm also working class Worcester. I always put in the hours. That's never been an issue. But having like the conversation and when I first got to Bushwick, it was like everybody was making like abstract geometrical paintings, and I was like the only person. I felt like not, I was still doing like landscape kind of figurative based stuff, and it just seemed like so much of this geometric abstraction, and it takes a minute to kind of get the bigger picture of like who else is talking about what you're talking about.
Right. Yeah, because then you realize, like, as your community of people grows, you realize, oh, actually everything's being made right now. And there's this idea that zombie formalism or whatever, or like whatever, the neo-figuration or whatever it is, like, oh, this is what's going on right now. But then you're like, wait, you start walking around people's studios and like, no, everyone's doing everything. It's just, things have a moment of where a few things get covered and it feels like, something bigger than it is really.
Yeah, it seems like for a minute that was kind of all that was showing, and then quickly thereafter that changed, or my perception changed, or I learned more, or whatever it was. But I'm sure a lot of abstract painters right now are like, it's all just figuration.
Yep.
But they might not be wrong. So
it ebbs and flows. I've been tremendously gifted at always doing the thing that's not in vogue.
But that means you're just anticipating the next change.
Right.
You're just ahead of the curve.
I'm just reacting 5 years later. No, but it's funny because, sometimes you'll move, from landscape to figuration or, some abstraction, whatever. And, the work takes you where the work takes you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You kind of follow
absolutely.
That stuff, and, whatever's going on elsewhere, whatever seems like there's energy around you can't really change that. You just have to do you.
Yeah. And it's really just a process because you still have to make it even if you never look at it again or you just whatever cut it out of the stretcher bars. Like you still have to make the thing to get it through your system so that you can make the next thing. So,
Right.
I just try and play the odds. I just try and make it a lot of paintings. That's my goal. Just make a bunch of them, and one or two will be pretty decent. That's what I'm going for these days.
Well, I don't know exactly when you started it, but the work that's sort of about this sort of, feeling in between culturally,
Yeah.
ethnically is really interesting. I mean, I live in a family of, a person who I'm partners with a person who lives that way, who's ethnically from one place but grew up here, and this idea of never really feeling at home somewhere is a really I don't know how to describe it, but I can only imagine it's a very specific feeling, you know?
Yeah, I think so, and yet I think it's a feeling many people are comfortable expressing, and maybe that's also like a function of living in New York, where so many of us are second generation immigrants, and we're all Heinz 57 or whatever, and like I think this kind of like loss of culture is like a big part of it because the country we live in is going through a crisis of like so many different dimensions, and it seems like part of that is like a loss of culture. Like there's so little keeping Americans healthy with their traditions and their like norms. It's so focused on shopping and buying bigger, and it doesn't have any kinds of like roots, and it does, it can go into the route of spirituality as well, but it also just doesn't have like a big like a history, like a culture of history, and not having that I think is part of this like displacement. Like my father being from Mexico, even though by way of Belgium, but my family being rooted in Mexico, they always just had so many more kind of like layers of culture. Like, it's a place where to date, if you stand still, a guy on a bicycle will bring bread over with a bell, and he'll ring a bell, and that you'll know what kind of bread he has by the bell that he's ringing, or like the tamales or whatever, that will cruise through the neighborhood and it'll come to you. And this is sort of like a totally different approach to a way of living that like we don't have this kind of like connection and that's like history on like a daily like routine level, and I think that's something that's missing, and something that I've always kind of like longed for, and building like a landscape that is talking or like encapsulating this like, or like emitting, I guess is more the word, like emitting this kind of like feeling of in between two places or in between no place. It's just been a really interesting place to explore.
Yeah. It's funny, because that is like a very, like if you have one parent who's from one place and another who's from another, and you're ethnically from, let's say, Argentina, and then you move when you're 4 and you grow up in New York or America. It's a very traceable, relationship that you're talking about. And I think are you saying that basically like America has this like loss of culture in a way because everything is like diluted, or it's not, you know what I mean? Is that kind of like what you're...
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think there was a time when like even in New York, you could go to like the German part of town, like on the Upper East Side, and there would be like a German festival, that would happen. You would partake in that experience, and for those families, that was the part of their roots. But like even still, that in some way like percolates into American life, where it becomes like the German American version of it. But so much of that has become homogenized, maybe through people moving around the country, and maybe through strip malls and just commercialism. Like you can't tell the difference between so many American towns. Like regionalism is not so specific here.
Right. Well, so I am an embodiment of what you're talking about, because I'm so mixed that I have no culture really.
Right.
So
yeah,
I have
that's
FOMO
what my
when it
husband
comes
says
to,
too.
you know, like I'm married to a woman who is from a place where everyone is ethnically that place pretty much.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I always feel like, oh, it must be so nice. But then so many people come to America, come to New York and think, oh, there's something beautiful about the fact that not everyone here is like, rah, rah, I'm from this place, and that it's like a melting pot of people. And in a way, there's something beautiful about when like people in New York don't care where you're from.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like my
sure.
like teenagers, like I have a teenager, so when they're in school, like the all the friends are from all, like there's so many mixed people that it's kind of cool because no one cares. They're just like,
Right.
you're just, no one even talks about it really. You know what I mean? And there's a real beauty to that, because it's almost like you gain, in what you gain, you lose. You lose some of
Yeah.
that direct relationship to a very specific cultural existence, but you also gain this new sort of fabric of a culture that is made up of, like, you know, mixing to where it's not singular anymore. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's kind of it's kind of cool in a way. I mean, it has its ups and downs. I think all of it does, you know. Like Germans during World War II were very tied to a specific way of being, which was maybe not a good ideology of collectivism. You know what I mean? So
Right.
it you know, sometimes these things are good, sometimes they can be bad.
Right. That's not the parade that we want to be celebrating.
No, I like the Puerto
no.
Rican Day Parade. I mean, the Puerto Ricans are very in touch. They're holding
Yeah.
it together when it comes
Right.
to a collectivism in New York City.
Exactly.
I'm always impressed.
Yeah, no, I think that's all fair, and I do think that, you know, there's like there's I mean, there's also a lot of pride in America for being American in this way that of course is toxic and scary, but like I am so proud to be a New Yorker simply because it is a place where you can be anything and anyone, and no one's gonna bother you, and it's in the safest way, where like you can have 3 heads and purple hair and literally someone's just going to be like, I like those shoes. Like, it doesn't matter at all, because there's at least 25 of everything there. And I think that's kind of like why I belong there as well. But as far as like the idea of like belonging, like I think, yeah, maybe it is like a lost cause. And like I'm kind of really into that too. Like I've been thinking of the work as kind of like a voyage or a journey, like in search of belonging. And someone recently asked me, like, do you find that belonging? And I was like, no, of course not. You're not going to like find it through my work. Like, no, I'm not, there's no conclusion. And there's not necessarily solace either. Like it's not measured in those terms, but rather this is the experience of what the painting is about, because of course for me, I belong to painting and painting belongs to me, and like that's kind of the short and long of it, right? This is where I belong.
Well, I would this might be a tangent, but I would think that it's kind of a nice metaphor that because we're talking a lot about like your ideas about place, relationship, family, and all that, and we're not really specifically talking about like, oh, in that painting behind you there's a circle, you know what I mean? We're talking about this sort of ingredients of what you're then bringing into a visual medium. But what's interesting is anytime you parse out ideas and thoughts, like anything like this or anything in general, into a painting or a visual piece of art, it's never defined really. You know, it's there's gray area, and that's kind of a beautiful resonance to, you know, this idea that there's a blurring of lines of like place, culture, ownership of a specific existence, you know what I mean? And then the surroundings, what shapes you. It's kind of like nature, nurture, you know. And making images is such a beautiful way to explore that phenomenon, because you don't have to, it's not like you're writing an essay, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So you can bring in even subconscious imagery or relationships to landscapes in different places, and you could, you could throw in a Belgian flower into a rock formation from when you were growing up, and then it talks in a way that's not literal. Like, people may not know that, but it has this sort of like relationship to you in a way, but it's not defined black and white, which is kind of great.
Yeah, no, I think
it's not a question. I guess it's just a ramble.
No, it's right on point though. I think that's exactly where I want to be. Is like taking from all kind of art, all parts of my experience as a person, and using imagery from all areas, and in a way, kind of smushing them together, but also trying it to, of course, design and be poetic about it. But ultimately, a lot of those connections don't need to make sense, and the more sense I try and make of them, the worse it is. Like, it's so much better often if it's just this almost random, but well-placed symbol.
Yeah, I can't help but think of like a Nirvana song, with like the lyrics, which are sometimes they feel heavy, but then there's a certain level of abstraction to it, and the music sometimes has like a positive, but then a real heavy side to it too. It's like this. Yeah, there's something nice about exploring these kind of ideas that aren't they're not, no matter what people think, they're not black and white. Nothing in life is black and white. We think we know things. You know what I mean? There's always a blurred edge to existence, and whether it's, I think music does it really well because it resonates sonically within you, and the words are, and same thing with art, like visual art. It's just a great place, a sandbox to like play out these ideas of, all this stuff that we're thinking about.
Yeah, it's a place for associations to be made.
Yeah, and ideally, if other people are looking at your work, and they go over and they read the press release, or they read the statement or a review, and then they think about this stuff in a different way that they might not have ever thought about it, and with the visual element, which is really cool, because in a way that's educational too, because you're seeing all these ideas that are within your mind. Like, this is Anna's mind and her existence and her history projected into this sort of like invented world,
Yeah, it feels like it's this other form of communication, so that I don't need to be present, and yet I'm already there.
Yeah, and it's not didactic. It's kind of like, well, ideally, most of us make work that we have a generative idea, but then it feeds back into us. Like, it gives us more ideas, or it teaches us something as well, which is the best kind of communication, I think,
Yeah, and definitely, I think that's really the goal in the studio, is just to always be making work that leads you to the next work.
That, and seeing how much coffee you can drink in one day.
And also keeping a steady hand after all that coffee.
Oh yeah, I wish it still had that effect. As it's nighttime and I'm drinking another coffee.
Oh no. That's a commitment.
Hey, it's sometimes it comes to that. The late night coffees.
Yeah.
So what are you working on now? Like, you have a show up now.
I'm sorry?
You have a show up now, don't you?
Well, my show just ended at Dinner Gallery. Yeah, it closed on Saturday. And it was a wonderful run. So that has just concluded. So I'm getting ready for some more stuff on the horizon.
Do you take the little break? Do you take the mini break, or do you go right into it?
I go right into it. I actually started work before they left the studio, because I just didn't want to have like the
empty
white
nest?
walls.
Yeah. I know, it's depressing.
I'm not into it. I also like to have at least 2 or 3 going at the same time, so that once one is done, I don't need to like start from zero. There's always some momentum going. So no, I got some stuff cooking now, and I'm going to be in this group show this summer at Monument Row, and
nice.
I'm going to be on the Huxley Parlor is going to be doing something new on their website, and they'll be putting me up there. So I'm making some work for that right now, and we'll see what else happens.
Last question. Favorite restaurant in Brooklyn?
Oh, man.
You weren't expecting that one, right?
Oh, that's a really hard question. Favorite
Well, it could be.
restaurant.
It could be of late. It doesn't have to be like all time. No pressure.
All right. Well,
Like, what's your go-to?
actually, you know what? My go-to right now, and you might be into this, is M Noodle Shop. Do you ever get that?
Yeah. Well, I used to live right by M over on Grand Street, so I
Yeah.
would get there all the time. I only did Noodle Shop once or twice. I haven't really
That place
gone
is-
deep.
It's excellent. It's like definitely my go-to.
Did you like
in the
M
studio.
Shanghai, like the OG one?
This is the one right across from Crest, right?
Yeah, well, that's the Noodle Shop, but the original one was just M Shanghai. It was on Grand Street in Williamsburg.
No, I guess I didn't know that one.
I'm getting old.
Yeah, because M's been there kind of a long time. the
That
Noodle
M.
Shop.
So when I moved to Grand Street in Williamsburg, there was only the Stinger Bar and Iona.
Ooh. Oh,
And-
Iona, yeah.
Those were the only two spots. Everything else was just like deadwood. And then
Yeah.
Food Swings opened, which was a vegan fast food joint, which was amazing
Wow.
because I've been vegetarian for a long time.
Wow.
And then that closed. But now it's all, I mean, you know. But have you eaten at Birds of a Feather?
No, and we've been talking about going. Is it excellent?
Yeah, it's legit.
Okay.
It's like real deal.
Okay. I will check it out. Also, have you been to Sean, X''IAN?
Sean Famous Foods.
Oof,
Yeah.
That place is the bomb.
Yeah, that's a chain, right? They have a bunch of those, I think.
A couple of them closed, actually. So I think there's only one or two now. There's one in the city and then the one in Greenpoint.
There's one in Long Island City, new one. It's huge,
Oh, wow. All right.
right by PS1.
Oh.
Everyone's like, "What the?" They're just talking about New York
What,
City
where?
food places. Listen, this is important to us, people.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, Birds of a Feather is legit, like Chinese
Okay.
food. Like it's
That's
not
exciting.
your standard, you know, greasy spoon Chinese joint.
Oh, Chinese food has had a comeback for sure.
Yeah, it's like you can get real stuff,
Yeah.
which is pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, it's like
healthy
that.
food,
Yeah, and I think, you know, that it's like the second wave. Like I remember when Japanese restaurants started getting really popular, and it was just like all sushi places. I was like, you know, there's
Yeah.
a lot more food in Japan than sushi.
Yeah.
And now you can get like legit like home style food and stuff, you know, that you would
Oh, yeah.
never see like 10 years ago. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Have you been to Rule of Thirds? That place is
Oh yeah,
fantastic. Oh my God.
it's really good.
Yeah. Brooklyn is really blessed.
Yeah, I know. That's the thing. That's the siren that keeps me here, you know.
Oh, yeah.
That and the public school system, or, you know, the school system.
Yeah.
But I mean, the food is so good. Like when you go out of
Oh.
the city, it's honestly, it's just hard because there's not the options, you know.
No. I mean, we're here upstate, and you have to plan like days in advance if you want to eat at a restaurant. I mean, we're 30 minutes from Hudson, and a lot of the restaurants close at 8 p.m.
Oh yeah, they're not staying up late. That's a weird
Bizarre.
thing too. Like when you go to a Dunkin' Donuts at 7 and it's closed, you're like, what the hell?
Yeah.
As a Bostoner, you know that. I mean, that
Yeah,
should be like
like,
24/7.
That's just an IV.
Well, listen, it was great to meet and to talk, and big fan of
Yeah.
the work. So thanks so much
Thank
for doing
you.
it. And
Yeah,
what people
thanks for
should
meeting with
follow
me.
you on Instagram.
Yeah,
and-
Instagram is the best way. I have a website, but if you want to keep current on the Instagrams, and yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was
Yeah,
lovely
no.
meeting with you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you. Sound and Vision is recorded, edited, and produced by myself, Brian Alfred. You can find out more about the podcast by checking it out online, soundandvisionpodcast.com, and on Instagram you can find images at Sound and Vision Podcast. Do a favor, if you're a fan of the podcast and you would like to support it, there are two great ways you could do it. One is to leave a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcast. And number two is getting the Why I Make Art official book of the Sound Vision podcast. You can get it anywhere you get books. And the other way you can support it is telling a friend about it. But many thanks for all your support for Golden Artist Colors, Fulcrum Coffee Roasters New York Studio School, and many thanks to Anna for taking the time. Got some great podcasts coming up with some really great painters, sculptors, all sorts of artists, so stay tuned.